For months, there was a quiet expectation surrounding Prince Harry, a belief that whatever came next would finally bring balance after years of tension, revelations, and deeply personal decisions. According to royal observers, Harry believed time, distance, and honesty would soften wounds that once felt impossible to heal. He expected friction, sure, but also dialogue, reflection, maybe even understanding. What he didn't expect was the outcome now taking shape, one that didn't arrive with drama or confrontation, but through something far more unsettling. Because the real consequence of walking away from royal life wasn't immediate backlash or public outrage. It was something slower, heavier, and far harder to undo. When Harry and Meghan first announced their decision to step back, it was framed as a reset rather than an ending. He spoke about protecting his family, prioritizing mental peace, and breaking cycles that had followed him since childhood. Those close to him say he genuinely believed the move would create space for healing, that by stepping away rather than rebelling outright, relationships could eventually stabilize. There was confidence in his voice, even relief, as if this choice would finally allow him to breathe while keeping emotional ties intact. What Harry didn't anticipate was how quickly that sense of control would slip away once the structure he had always relied on was no longer there. As time passed, Harry chose openness as his way forward, sharing his experiences through interviews, documentaries, and eventually his memoir. Reports claim he believed that telling his truth would clarify misunderstandings and invite empathy, not just from the public, but from his own family. Instead, each revelation added new weight to a situation already under strain. Within royal circles, sources suggest that while some understood his pain, the level of detail crossed lines that were never meant to be crossed publicly. Harry expected shock, then conversation. What followed was something very different. Rather than public rebuttals or emotional responses, the royal family chose restraint. No counters, no corrections, no visible attempts to engage. To the institution, silence was not avoidance but strategy, something it had perfected over generations. For Harry, however, that silence felt unfamiliar and deeply unsettling. Royal observers note that he may not have anticipated how powerful non-response could be, or how quickly it would shift control of the narrative away from him. By speaking openly, he expected clarity. Instead, the lack of reaction created distance that words couldn't bridge. At first, many applauded Harry's vulnerability, praising his willingness to speak openly about pain and pressure. But public sympathy is rarely stable. Over time, reactions became more divided, with some questioning motives, timing, and the impact on his family. Royal commentators note that Harry may have underestimated how quickly narratives evolve, especially when personal truth collides with tradition. The image of the relatable prince didn't disappear, but it became more complicated, layered with skepticism and debate that followed him into every new project. Behind the headlines, Harry was facing something far more personal. No longer a working royal but forever linked to the crown, he found himself in an in-between space that few truly understand. Sources suggest this identity shift was more disorienting than expected. The structure, rhythm, and purpose that had shaped his entire life were suddenly gone, replaced by freedom that carried its own uncertainty. He didn't expect how heavy it would feel to lose not just a role, but the framework that once defined who he was. Stepping back may have felt reversible at first, like pressing pause rather than stop. But as years passed, reality set in. Royal insiders say Harry is now confronting the permanence of decisions that once felt flexible. Certain privileges, connections, and traditions don't simply return once set aside, not out of punishment, but because the institution prioritizes continuity above all else. What Harry didn't expect was how quietly those doors would close, without announcements or final words. Freedom brought responsibilities Harry had never faced before. Without royal backing, every project carried risk, every venture needed to succeed, and every misstep drew sharper criticism. Sources suggest he underestimated how personal failure would feel in a world where his position was no longer guaranteed. Independence offered autonomy, but it also removed the safety net that once softened public judgment. The pressure to remain relevant, credible, and impactful became constant. Harry reportedly believed that major family moments would create opportunities for reconnection. Milestones, anniversaries, and shared appearances felt like chances for progress. Instead, those moments unfolded with formality rather than warmth. Royal observers note that he may not have anticipated how being present doesn't always mean being close. These encounters reinforced a painful truth that trust, once altered, changes the shape of relationships in lasting ways. Another outcome Harry didn't foresee was how quickly his story would be simplified by history. Royal sources say he's becoming increasingly aware that complex decisions are often reduced to defining moments. How his departure is remembered may shape his legacy more than his intentions ever could. This realization has reportedly led to greater caution, an understanding that not every thought needs to be shared, and not every feeling belongs in the public domain. Harry has spoken about wanting a different life for his children, one free from the pressures he endured. Yet sources suggest he may not have anticipated how distance from royal life would shape their connection to that heritage. The divide is not just physical but cultural, and bridging it requires more than good intentions. Explaining a past they'll know mostly through stories and headlines is a challenge that continues to weigh on him. Over time, insiders say Harry has begun to understand that reconciliation, if it comes, may not look the way he once imagined. It may arrive quietly, through coexistence rather than closeness. For someone who values emotional clarity, this subtle resolution can feel incomplete. But within the royal framework, this is often how peace is maintained. Accepting that reality has been one of Harry's hardest lessons. Today, Harry exists in a space that defies easy labels. Advocate and critic, prince and private citizen, insider and outsider all at once. Balancing these identities has proven far more complex than he expected when he first sought independence. Friends describe an undercurrent of reflection, even grief, not just for what was lost, but for what might have been under different circumstances. This in-between state has become the true outcome he never anticipated. In the end, this story isn't about titles or headlines. It's about expectations colliding with reality. Harry didn't expect that the hardest part of leaving would be the quiet consequences, the slow realization that some relationships don't return to what they once were, even when love still exists. What began as a search for freedom turned into a lesson about permanence, identity, and limits. As this chapter continues to unfold, the real question isn't how the royal family will respond, but how Harry will continue to grow within a future that looks very different from the one he thought he was choosing.